So today's our second webinar is going to be the warehouse free returns, optimizing US logistics for global brands. So with that, I'd love to introduce our guests and our host for this conversation. So I'll start with our guest, Ben Wunderman. So Ben is the CEO and co-founder of Packsmith, an all-in-one e-commerce logistics platform that's built for brands. Ben has over 2 decades of experience in e-commerce and retail logistics and a passion for driving innovation for growing brands. Ben was an early employee at Lyft and Postmates, and he ran competitive strategy for last mile logistics at General Motors. He's also consulted across the industry on reverse logistics optimization for e-commerce. So welcome, Ben. We're really excited to have you over here. And then Disney, or Diz Petit, our founder and CEO of Liquidonate, is going to be the host for today, and she is revolutionizing how businesses handle excess inventory. She's a tech veteran who spearheaded social impact initiatives at Postmates, including the award-winning Civic Labs and Food Fight. Diz now leads Liquidonates in its mission to accelerate the world's transition to a circular economy. Liquidonates platform basically connects excess inventory with nonprofits nationwide, helping businesses cut costs, minimize waste, and benefit communities. Since launching, Liquidonate has raised multi-million-dollar funding, really 12 million items worth over $100 million, and earned recognition as a leader in sustainable tech innovation. Beyond Liquidonate, Diz also serves on the Fast Company Impact Council and A Meal with Dignity's board, championing social responsibility and community development. So thank you, Diz, for also being here and taking the time out. With that, I will hand over the reins of this conversation to you and stop sharing my screen as well, and then we can get started.
Sounds great. Well, Hassan, thank you so much for having us and hosting this meeting. Ben, it's a pleasure to be hosting this meeting with you. I think that what Packsmith is doing, and Liquidonate, but especially Packsmith is doing, is so interesting and innovative in the logistics space. So I'll start out by just thanking everyone for joining our webinar on warehouse free returns to optimize logistics for global brands in the US. As Hassan said, my name is Disney Petit. I go by Diz as well. You can decide if we're friends or not if you want to call me Diz. And I'm the founder and CEO at Liquidonate, whereas he said we match excess inventory and returns from retailers and brands to nonprofits across the US and Canada to help them save billions of dollars every year and to do the right thing for people and the environment. It's my pleasure to introduce Ben Wunderman, the co-founder and CEO at Packsmith, and dig into the work that he and his team are doing around warehouse free returns. Ben, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I would. I'll give a bit of context on my journey very quickly to working on this stuff and why I think it matters. I think Kasani gave a great intro to me. I don't want to repeat too much of that, but I will say sustainability is something that has driven my career through tech, before tech, and probably after tech. It's something I care deeply about, but I never thought that I'd be able to leverage the consumer insights that I learned through working in real world tech businesses for sustainability goals and vice versa. And that's something that we've put together at Packsmith, that we've enabled at Packsmith. And I'm excited to get into the discussion today and talk about how we can make that work for brands of all sizes without having to rely on a lot of centralized infrastructure. But for my journey, it's been about putting together various insights that have enabled us as a company, but also me as a founder and as a interested individual in this space to ensure that we can build really sustainable supply chains that build circularity in from the ground up and from the top down at the same time. That's really what drives me. And I just never thought we'd end up in a situation where we could combine some of these insights in a way that would make a meaningful difference to both the planet and to the brands that are trying to scale and grow.
Yeah, and we're all stakeholders in this, right? We all live on this planet. So we all have a vested interest in this from whatever perspective it is. We all live here and we all need to take care of what we have. So I think that I'll start by sharing a little bit generally about the returns process and kind of how it works for folks who are on the call today. Obviously, this is a generalization, but then I would love to get into like how Packsmith interacts with these returns, because it is like super innovative, and I feel like I'm bearing the lead on like how you all do this with your software. But with returns, the way that they work today in the retail industry is a lot of time a customer will order something online or buy it in the store. They'll decide they want to return it. They'll usually select a return reason, either from a drop-down menu on a website, or they'll go to the store and ask to return it. And then the system at that retailer determines, based on a set of policies, what should happen to that product. Today, most of the outcomes for those products either become return to warehouse because they're going to attempt to resell it, keep it where the customer is told to keep the item. And if they really didn't want it, then they're probably just going to throw it away. And then the third option is landfill. And so these three options are not the best for the environment, they're not the best for the retailer, and they're not the best for the consumer. And so with Liquid Donate, what we've done is we've built software that will actually intercept the return at the customer's home and say, hey, when you're going online to return this product, instead of shipping it all the way across the country to the East Coast or the West Coast, where a majority of the warehouses in the United States are for these retailers, instead, our software will take your parameters and match it with a nonprofit that's within about 35 miles of that customer's home, anywhere in the US or Canada. And so with that process, we're actually reducing the cost of the return for the retailer by about 60%. And we're reducing the transit distance, which equals emissions, by on average 93%. And so that's the traditional returns process and kind of the limitations and how we're facing it. Tell us a little bit about how Packsmith is innovating in the space too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll share my screen and share a bit of imagery here of what we've actually built for customers. But I think it's worth calling out too that we're really early in this e-commerce journey and the journey of a big transition in the global economy. Probably the biggest transition in the global economy we'll see in our lifetimes. That's what e-commerce represents. We're at 16% or so of total retail sales today in the US from e-commerce. So the majority of returns and the majority of purchases are still made in stores. E-commerce continues to grow extremely quickly, though. And as e-commerce takes more of that share away from retail stores in the physical world, we're experiencing as a society and as an economy a dramatic shift in how we have to move all this stuff around the country and around the world. And it feels progressive right now. It's not happening overnight. It will happen over the next 10 to 20 years. This is a slow burn, but very substantial growth problem. But as that shift occurs, the impacts that we're feeling now and will continue to feel will become more intense and become stronger, particularly when it comes to the logistical components of this bit of these systems. So I think it's worth calling that out. I think there's often an assumption that returns is figured out, right? That we have some big solution here that everyone knows how to do this, or that e-commerce is a big thing and it's going to stay the same size that it currently is, and blah, 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 blah. That's all wrong within the context of the global economy and with the way that e-commerce is actually growing. And I think it's worth calling it out and mentioning that as we talk through and thinking through that as we talk through today. So I'll quickly share just a look at Packsmith and what we're doing and why we're doing it. So I came in my background and my co-founder's background from building marketplace type businesses that leveraged the power of operations to scale and grow. Lyft, Postmates, Uber, and other companies in those spaces. At Packsmith, what we're doing is giving brands the tools to, in a verticalized SaaS product, to manage their Shopify inventory and inventory from other sources, as well as all of their fulfillments, outgoing and returns. And we combine that with on-the-ground software and operations that gives those same brands the power of connected data between those systems. What we typically see in this space in e-commerce is people building really good software that's disconnected from the operations. And we see people building really good operational processes that can't fit into the current software frameworks that are being developed and scaled. And at Packsmith, we're putting those two pieces together in a way that enables us to capture a lot of data on behalf of brands, particularly around the returns experience. So we do outbound logistics and we do reverse logistics And we think the operational component is just as important here as the software component. And that's the principle in which we're building at Packsmith. We're working primarily with Shopify merchants. We work with merchants across the entire ecosystem, including retail brands. And we bring together a lot of different services and products that brands are typically piecing together in order to make their supply chain and their logistics and fulfillment work, and bring that into one single pane of glass for brands. Particularly on our side, this comes down to where value is created in this process, both outgoing and reverse logistics, and that's fulfillment. We often think about shipping and carriers as being the most important piece of this puzzle. They're a really critical piece for sure, but the actual value is created in the process of fulfilling an order or dispositioning a return. And we've built mobile-based software that enables anybody to run that process, whether you're a brand, an independent logistics entrepreneur, who we call Packsmiths, who do this in their homes, and folks who are doing this in a store or retail environment as well. So that's what we've built at Packsmith, and we think that connection between the operations and the software is critical to really understand the nature of why this is such a big problem and actually solve it for sustainability outcomes, but also for cost and efficiency outcomes. And that's what we're doing.
That's awesome. Thanks for going through that, Ben. And I think that one of the things that really impressed me about Packsmith when I heard about it, and what led to the idea of a warehouse free return, is that part of the Packsmith ecosystem and the ecosystem that a lot of folks who are building in this space are working on is that we're actually working together a lot more cooperatively than I feel like in past roles where we both worked and in past industries. So I think it's awesome that with Packsmith, you can sign up to be a Packsmith, and then brands will actually send their products to you so that when a local person goes to buy that product, they can actually ship it out and reduce that shipping distance. And I think that that's just a fascinating way to potentially replace warehouses. And the returns piece and how Liquid Donate fits into this is because when the customer goes to make the return, it's not always a great opportunity to send the product back to that Packsmith if they know that it needs to be donated. And so that's how our software fits into this. And so I think that how many collaborations we have, and how you shared on your slide, how you get all of these different collaborations in one, I think is really the future of e-commerce and the future of the way that we move these products. So I think it's just really interesting. Go ahead.
No, 100%. And I think back to the earlier point, right, about the evolution of this industry. What we see right now, as you mentioned, is a really centralized system of warehouses that is largely based on the West Coast and parts of the East Coast and Midwest. 80% of e-commerce orders ship from Southern California. The rest ship from Northern Pennsylvania and parts of New Jersey. This infrastructure right now in the US, but around the world, is extremely concentrated and extremely centralized. And that worked well for a while, right, in the early stages of e-commerce growth. But as e-commerce takes more and more market share away from retail stores, which are themselves a distributed network, we face the problem of having to distribute goods in a way that actually works and return those products in a distributed way that can scale. And that's really the challenge as e-commerce continues to grow.
So talking about the global side of this, since we've talked a little bit about how you make things warehouse free, how we help things prevent them from going to a warehouse in the first place. Let's talk a little bit about the global side of this. So what specific challenges do you see global brands facing with traditional returns processes, and how can they prepare for a future where integrated solutions like Packsmiths can play a role?
Yeah, absolutely. So centralization is one of those core problems, and that plays out in every single market in which you're trying to sell or ship to. For example, if you're a brand shipping from the US into global markets, you're typically centralizing that process, and returns can be a real nightmare when it comes to getting something from the UK or from Asia back to the US to process and assess. If you do have a distributed network of 3PLs, third-party logistics providers, or returns providers or enablers on the global level, those providers are typically not integrated. It's very, very rare to have integration on that level. And so you have piecemeal data across the board. So that's the second big problem there. And the third one that we see often is on the inbound side. And we'll talk about end-to-end flow as we go through here, but returns are just one piece of the puzzle. And to really assess the returns problem and solve for it meaningfully and actually make it a competitive advantage for your brand and your business, you have to think about the whole entire supply chain from end to end and creating flow in that process. And one of the great inefficiencies there is bringing inventory in from overseas and ensuring that if that inventory is coming into the country or into multiple countries, that the process of putting those components together, say formulating a skincare product with packaging from China, but that is manufactured in the Midwest of the United States, for example, putting all those pieces together actually works in a way that can be disassembled on the return side. That's a real challenge. So globalizing on both ends is a big problem. And the disparate elements here that you have to put together and the synthesization of data that we have to do is an unsolved problem in this industry. And that's the biggest challenge.
Definitely. I mean, when we're talking about inefficiencies, I think if folks on the call today are part of a supply chain or a logistics team or reverse logistics team, you felt the pain yourself in dealing with these different things, and the inefficiencies are just endless. Like, I know one of the things that really fascinated me early on in my career is that I learned that a lot of enterprise companies actually have an entity created, a corporation for their physical stores and a separate entity for their online stores. And that means that their SKU systems don't actually talk to each other. And so there's all these little complications that come up in the process of trying to make these things work. So I love that you mentioned that we're super early on in this process. I know we're 3 years in, we've donated over 11 million items, almost 12 million now. And that's just not even the tip of the iceberg of what is available for excess inventory and returns donations. So tell me a little bit more about how brands are effectively managing returns independently while leveraging your fulfillment capabilities.
Yeah, so let me just again share a look at our returns product on the integration side and what we do to kind of orchestrate some of this, if that makes sense. One of the kind of key principles here is bringing data in from multiple sources and then being able to feed that data out in a way that works. And Liquid Donate is one of those dispositioning options within the Packsmith universe. But as you described, these chains of dispositioning and assessing returns can get really, really complicated really, really quickly. And one of the things we do is guide brands through how that works and how it should work, right? Working with companies that make sense as partners in this process. So what you're looking at here is both the brand side, what you see in the Packsmith platform itself with a return, as well as what you see in the process of assessing a return via the Packsmith platform on the reverse logistics, reverse fulfillment side. And what's interesting here is most brands aren't even capturing the level of data that you might see with this t-shirt product that we're looking at here. Most brands are not getting this data and feeding it back into their systems to make better decisions about what happens to stuff, but also about how they can improve and reduce returns over time. So as we talked about, the shipping cost can be a big component here, and localizing the process of assessing return is really important. And then ensuring you have a flow from that localized Packsmith location or dispositioning location into donation, into recycling and other channels is critical to making this work on a cost level for your business, but also making it work across the different buyer types you have as a brand. So that's how we think about it. This is kind of the framework for how we position the data that we're working with, whether it comes from brand buyers themselves or whether it comes from some piece of the process of returning an item.
Got it. That makes sense. And just to touch on the innovation piece, I know there's some folks on the call who are early stage innovators at their companies as well, whether they're within the company and trying to change it, or it's a company they started on their own. And I think when we're talking about streamlining processes, it is really helpful to think about what the full experience is. And also for me, and Ben, I don't know if you had the same experience, but when we really started digging into this, there's just so many layers. And so it's going to take a long time to unwind the way that things were and the way that things are going to move in the future. And one of the innovations that we came up with throughout this journey that we've been on, instead of just donating excess returns or excess inventory and returns in bulk, but in order to make it more streamlined, we realized that we were going to have to work with additional partners. We were going to need to become this routing software so that a retailer doesn't have to buy and plug into 10, 20 different softwares. For those who might not have caught it at the beginning, Ben and I used to work together at Postmates. And one of the things that we built together at Postmates was the merchant network. And with the merchant network, if you go into a restaurant today, you'll see a tablet for Uber, you'll see a tablet for Postmates, you'll see a tablet for DoorDash, you'll see a tablet for Grubhub. All of these different companies have their own tablet to send these orders to the restaurant. And I know for me, one of the things that I really wanted to build when I started Liquid Donate was a streamlined way that was actually easy for the retailers to access this platform and this program, and one source where they could go to for all of their needs. And so what we're building within our software outside of the return to warehouse option and the return to a nonprofit option is we're building out the recycling, the upcycling, and those additional disposition flows, e-waste, so that a retailer really can just say, hey, like, we'll install the Liquid Donate software, we will route all of our products the way that we want them routed, and we'll store them in people's homes and reduce that cost with Packsmith, and just making all these things work together. So what future innovations have you been thinking about and kind of dreaming about?
Yeah, I think what you explained it really well. I think there's one thing on the innovation side that we often forget in this process, which is what's the strategy, right? Like, how do you have the tools, and we're building the tools now, but how do we guide brands, and like many from the call, towards the right approach for your products and the specificity of categories in which you're selling, whether it be apparel or beauty or any other category that you're working with, can really change the dynamics of what that routing and what that logic looks like. So leveraging newer technologies, and I hate to drop the AI bomb on us all for the millionth time today, but AI and ML does really have the potential to enable us to make really good choices and better choices about what that logic looks like. And I'll quickly share what we're doing at Packsmith. As we process both outgoing shipments and returns, we've captured now over 30,000 images of real world fulfillments, with real people fulfilling the orders and real people processing the returns, and then combining that data with data about the products themselves. So the advantage of working with companies like ours is we can capture a lot of data upfront about the products you're actually working with, make sure that's matched with your actual inventory, but the physical data around products, the weight, the size, the packaging type, the primary packaging type, the tertiary packaging type, right? These are all terms that we can unpack as we go through here. But that data is extremely important and is not being utilized today in a way that helps optimize for returns and enables returns to work in a more streamlined fashion. So I really believe that the potential for AI and ML in this sector, especially because AI and ML around images is so well developed, is massive when it comes to how we can actually improve these processes. Most third-party logistics providers are not capturing any data around the returns states, or and especially not image data around those returns. And there's a lot we can learn from those images and those data as we aggregate them and put them together. But AI and ML is a really good technology solution at this point of the evolution of the industry to enable that to happen faster and better, right? You don't have to search through thousands of images to find the one with a damaged product, right? Or you can identify damage in a product in a return, or you can identify whether the condition of that item is what makes it possible for it to be donated or put back into inventory and reduce waste. So the waste reduction opportunity here and sustainability possibilities here are really turning on how AI and ML can leverage image data in the process. And that's one thing that we're working on the innovation side as we continue to scale.
Yeah, the AI piece is really exciting when we think about leveraging AI for good. Like, how can we use these products to actually make things easier and more manageable? Because I envision a world in the future in which that that primary packaging, the secondary and the tertiary packaging, all of those products are actually able to be sorted in a way that actually means that they can be recycled or upcycled into new products. So just imagine a world in which all cardboard was actually making it to a cardboard recycler or to an upcycler. Like, that would be a huge change for the environment. And so I think that's really the direction that this enables us to go. I'm going to hop to one of the last questions. Is I just would love for you to tell us a little bit about your background and interest in sustainability. I know you shared a little bit about that, but like, why does this matter to you? Like, what is it about this that makes you wake up every day and unravel all of the different pieces of the reverse logistics chain that you're on?
I think for me, the driving motivation, and this is going to sound a little weird potentially, but I hate inefficiency. I hate waste in any process. And I think a big piece of the problem that we're facing here is just a vast amount of waste and inefficiency that actually increases costs for brands and for supply chains. And for me, that's an exciting problem to solve, is if we can reduce waste, save money, and drive the outcomes on the sustainability side that we want to see, then it's a win-win-win for everybody. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about solving for this problem in this space. But for me, in my evolution, it was growing up in Tasmania, Australia, where I'm from originally, a state that is largely old growth forest for the majority of the state, about 45% old growth forest. And growing up alongside unsustainable logging practices, unsustainable production practices that often led or the origin for where a lot of the products that we were manufacturing become the origin source for those products. And seeing that firsthand on a global level, but also on a localized level, made me really think about why it mattered, right? Because often that's hidden from our view. We don't see how stuff is produced and how the things we buy are connected to the environment and sustainability. But as e-commerce continues to grow, we're not just going to see more stuff in the world and more stuff being shipped, but that means more trucks on the road, more ships on the ocean, right? Emissions will rise. E-commerce will become one of those key drivers of climate change and climate impact. And we can solve that problem in the moment of building really good solutions that save cost and reduce waste. And for me, that's what is really exciting about this opportunity, is the opportunity to do this at this time when in 10 years or 20 years, we'll be too far down the path to reverse course even more. This is that shift from retail to e-commerce. And in that shift, we should have a transition that really enables better sustainability outcomes. And I think back to those, to my origin, and think back to those environments that I care about, and think about what the impact would be if we could reduce some of that supply chain waste along the way.
Thanks for sharing that. I know a lot of
Mm,
people in this space, and at least on the team with Liquid Donate and the folks who are representing nonprofits on the call today, as part of the demand network that we have, are all doing this because it's important to us. And
mm,
everyone has a story on why this is so important. I mean, for me, I've been a volunteer with different nonprofits and organizations ever since I was 17. I've just always been really excited about being involved in the community and trying to help people in whatever way that I could. And a lot of times I would go to a facility, a nonprofit, where people were bringing donations, and those donations were just not of a good quality. They're not a quality that you would feel comfortable even giving to a friend. And so being able to take a product like a return that is unused, maybe it's missing a tag, those types of products are still good quality items that should be in the hands of somebody who needs them and who can utilize them. And so for me, being able to route these products to where I think they should go and be able to get there, it's a matter of dignity. So I love hearing origin stories on how people got into this, because it's definitely not the easiest job. Everyone on this call knows that. And so you have to have something that keeps you going every day. So I'm going to ask folks to put questions in the chat that they have for Ben or for me, or any insights that they'd like to share. I'd like to thank Ben for joining and for your contributions, and the attendees for participating in the conversation today. And Ben, I know you said that you had another few slides that you might be interested in sharing to talk a little bit more about the tertiary packaging and things like that. Did you want to jump into that while we wait for a few of the questions to come in?
I think one of the things we should focus on quickly here, I wanted to talk through just kind of a couple of principles that I think are important in this optimization problem that we're trying to solve here for warehouse free returns. I think the idea of taking warehouses out of the equation is a scary concept, right? And it can be on the donation side as well too. I think one thing that you mentioned that resonated with me is, and will resonate, I think, with a lot of people on the call, is this is a problem on the donation side and for nonprofits at a very high level, right? I think I was always frustrated growing up when you would have a, food donation drive, and I was always thinking about how we're going to get this stuff to the people that need to access it, and how much does that cost in the process, and what are the managerial implications that nonprofits face in that
You
journey.
sound
And I think
you sound
that's
like you were a very fun kid.
I was I was that was not a whole lot of fun. But it really matters, right? I think anyone on the call today who is running a nonprofit, working for a nonprofit, knows the fact that a lot of people are willing to donate stuff without thinking about what happened next to those items and those goods, and how those goods get to the recipients that need them. And optimizing that piece is just as important as optimizing any other piece of the supply chain for brands that can be donating goods. So, three principles that I think are really important here for brands and nonprofits to think about. Number one, returns are core to the customer experience, and you can capture a lot of valuable data, as we talked about, in that process. Don't treat returns as just a cost center for your business. They're actually an opportunity to collect the most valuable data about how consumers are interacting with your products, behavioral data, and data around your products. A quick example here, we have a brand that had a slight manufacturing defect in one of their glass bottles they were using, and it was about 2 to 5% of their overall supply. But tracing that defect back initially came from returns from customers who said, this product's leaking. What's going on here? I'm returning this. And capturing that data at the returns point in the journey, and then being able to deal with that return in a meaningful way, provided really valuable data that fed all the way back to the upstream side of the business, and actually end up reducing cost for the business, as well as ensuring their products were more sustainably produced. Second, I think we've talked about this a little bit, but end-to-end flow, right? Optimizing for continuous flow through your system, not having too much excess inventory, not having too little inventory. Those are the two typical states that brands find themselves in: too little inventory, or too much, or inventory placed in the wrong locations. And this happens at every step in the process, from shipments right back to checkout, right back to when you order from suppliers, and then when you do the returns process. So optimizing that end-to-end flow rather than isolating returns is really key. And I think accounting for transaction costs is the other one here. And when I say transaction costs, I don't just mean the actual financial costs that come into play here. I'm talking about the costs of searching for a solution on the recycling side, right? And making sure that those processes are efficient, eliminating waste in
And
the
transparent.
process, and transparent, absolutely. And that transparency drives accountability when it comes to all of the costs, including operational costs. If you've got a product in front of you and you're deciding what to do with it, that is part of the cost process that you need to bake in and think about. So I want to extend this notion from we're thinking about cost in terms of financial terms or in terms of generalized waste to the cost of processes that we're working with as well in this returns business and in the business of e-commerce generally.
Yeah. We had there's a Netflix film. I don't know if you had a chance to watch it yet, called Buy Now. It's a documentary that just came out, Buy Now, the Shopping Conspiracy. I think it was well poised to come out around Black Friday. You can post in the chat if you had a chance to watch it. Even I, who knew a lot about this problem, had to pause it 3 times while I was watching it because it's just so upsetting. And I actually hosted a fireside chat with Anna Sachs, who's one of the women who's featured in there, who's the trash walker in New York. So she actually goes and investigates these types of retail waste and things that are just getting thrown out. And it just seems so unsustainable and unnecessary for these products that are still in this usable condition to end up in these places. And so I would definitely recommend that film if you haven't watched it yet and you're curious more about this topic. So we have a few questions in the chat. So Ben, the first question is for you. What is the main pushback for Packsmith when it comes to changing their operations in this way?
And we're talking about brands here, talking about brands changing their operations.
That would be my guess.
Yeah, I think, and in terms of building a really good returns process and a really efficient process, I think generally speaking, knowledge is the biggest blocker, right? Like, how do I do this? Like, I don't know how to do this. And I think a lot of brands come to us, and a lot of our customers that we work with, they assume they need to know or should know already how this should work, right? As we talked about, there's kind of this assumption that there is a process here that's really established and that everyone should follow across the industry. And that's just simply not the case. And depending on your category and your products, that's going to vary dramatically. And working with a strategic partner and a set of strategic partners that can help guide you through that process, that tends to be the biggest blocker. Is there's this assumption that, oh, I should know how this should work. I don't. So I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and that'll be fine. Or this software solution will solve it for me. Software alone and tech alone won't solve this problem. Really good knowledge about your particular products and how that should flow, that really is what's important here. And that's one of the biggest blockers that we see. Disparate data, right? Non-integration between systems, that's all an important driver, but knowledge is one of those big ones. And I say that in a very generalized way because most people, in my view, who are working on the brand side or working on the nonprofit side, don't necessarily lack the knowledge, but they lack the context for the options that are available. And that strategic plan for how you scale returns and scale outbound shipments, that should all fit together. But working with a partner to help develop that is what you should be doing. You shouldn't be trying to do this alone, and you should be seeking out help around how to solve these challenges. That's one of the biggest problems we see. Yeah.
And it's new. I think there's a lot of new and
Yeah.
innovative solutions in this. And so that's one of the goals of our webinar series, is to really bring people to the forefront who are tackling these issues, who are bringing solutions to the table. And in the question, I also asked the pushback for Liquid Donate when it comes to this change in operations. And we really look at this in a way that we need to make it simpler and cheaper than what they're doing today in order to make this transition happen. So we've actually made it so that retailers are able to start using us the same day they find out about our product. We've made a pay-as-you-go model so they can give it a try. We've made it super accessible. They don't have to download anything. And then there are full integrations available, Shopify app, different things like that, based on whatever systems they're using that will make it even easier. But we know a lot of people are still new to this space and want to try it out. And so we've built in a lot of ways for people to try it before they really commit, because we know it's a big change, but it's a necessary change, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I'll quickly add on the pushback side there too. I think one of the pushbacks we often hear is around costs. And that connects to the knowledge problem that we see in this space is if you actually know your costs, things may look very different than you think they actually are. And that's often what we see is a lot of brands think they know how much a return is costing them. They think they know how much their inventory is costing them. But when we work with them to break it down and give them other alternatives, that cost profile changes dramatically. And they realize they're actually spending a lot of money to do something they thought was relatively efficient. So when we get pushback on cost, we dig deeper and we look at the strategy and we look at the details underneath and the actual costs that are baked into this entire system. And then things can change really quickly for brands and how they think about cost.
Yeah, we've seen a very similar thing, is the disconnect between what someone is paying for a person at a warehouse, the storage at the warehouse, shipping costs that are associated with the return, the cost of goods sold. These all live in different line items on the P&L. And so when we're working with retailers, we have to say, no, this is the full cost, and the true cost of returns is what we call it. And so I think, TM trademark. No, feel free to use it. So the next question, we have time for 2 more questions. So this question is from Bob regarding the supply chain. Do you care what platform your customers are utilizing? Legacy platforms like i2 and Manugistics, as well as SAP and Oracle, for example. In other words, does your solution interact with their current supply chain platforms?
Yeah, I'll answer for us, which is yes. We build both custom integrations and we have integrations across the ecosystem. I think the bigger question here is you should care about what platform you're using and platforms you're using and how they all fit together and whether they are best in breed for what you're doing in e-commerce and retail at this point in time. I think a lot of the legacy solutions have the power, right, across a number of different market segments as well as across a number of different functionalities. But the efficiency of using those tools and putting those tools together can be a real challenge. So often this is a chance to step back and assess whether the tools that you're using at a fundamental level within your business are the right ones. But yes, for us, we integrate across a range of different platforms, including solutions that have been in the market for a long, long time, in order to provide that connectivity that brands and retailers are looking for.
Yeah, and the same for Liquid Donate. We offer API integrations that work with this legacy software for enterprise retailers who are the ones typically using that type of software. And then for the SMBs, the small and medium-sized businesses, the small and medium-sized enterprises, those retailers are usually using something like Shopify, or we can work directly with them with some kind of other aggregator. And so once again, we're kind of like acting as this trusted advisor to say like, oh, well, like this is what you're doing today. This is how we could connect to all of these things because we live and breathe this every day. We don't make the candles. We don't sell the shirts. We don't build the furniture. We're the ones who are just building this logistics software. So I think that's a really interesting point. Yeah. And then the last question we have time for today is, can you share some feedback you've received from nonprofit partners? Would love to hear some success stories. Ben, do you have anything you'd like to share about products being donated on the nonprofit side?
I think what opened my eyes here really to this opportunity and how brands can work with Liquid Donate and other platforms is that there is demand, right, for products to be donated. And localizing that is a really big challenge. And that's where a lot of both brands and nonprofits find or run into problems is like, how can I localize this? How can I make this as local as possible and actually help folks in my community? But the big insight for me around this and for all of our brands was the fact that this is possible, and it's possible to do this. And on the nonprofit side, that there are products out there that are just being wasted in a way that could be utilized within their own networks of distribution. I think those two audiences aren't yet fully talking to each other, and these conversations are starting that process. But for us, I've seen them happening in different bubbles, and we're bringing those together. I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, this all goes back to dignity. It's an item that maybe someone would say, oh, someone who is experiencing homeless doesn't need this product, like headphones. Like maybe they say, oh, they don't need that. But why do they not deserve to have it if it's available, right? And so going back to that key piece of dignity, and one of the nonprofits that really sticks with me that we made a donation to was that there was an organization, a company, a retailer that was going out of business, and they had a number of walkers that were available. And so we were able to donate those to an elder facility nonprofit. And one of the women found our email address to specifically reach out to us as the company and just share a photo of her with the walker and say that she really never thought that she would have like her own new walker. And I think that people just take a lot of this for granted of what we have in this world. And when there's product that already exists, we really don't need to make more of it. So with that, Ben, any final thoughts before we say thanks to everybody and we sign out for the day?
No, thank you everyone for joining. I think this is a really important conversation that we're having. I think it's really important, the work that Liquid Donate is doing to enable donation as a really important channel for return goods. And this is possible, right? We can solve this problem without building giant warehouses, without necessarily doing a lot more physical stuff in the world than we're already doing. It's about efficiency and systems, and you're building the tools to make that happen on the donation side. And I think that is really changing the game for how returns will be structured over the next 5 to 10 to 20 years. So I'm super excited to continue to work on this with you and others, but super excited to have an audience today that can hear and see where this is going, contribute from their perspectives as well. So thank you to all the folks joining today.
Yeah, well, it was a pleasure to have you on this call. It's a pleasure to be partners with you and excited to continue the conversation. So Hassan, I'll turn it back over to you, and thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for joining and for taking the time out. This was a great and very insightful conversation. And I think with the questions we saw too, we can see that everyone also enjoyed the chat too. For anyone else, feel free to, if you ever want to reach out to either Ben at Packsmith or Liquid Donate, you have our websites. You can come to either packsmith.io or go to liquiddonate.com and reach out to us over there. We're always happy to get on a call and help out further with any questions or needs over there. But thank you both again for joining in. With this, we'll call our webinar a success for today. Diz has put her email over there, diz@liquiddonate.com. So if you ever want to reach out to her for any questions or anything else, feel free to reach out to that email. And you have Ben's as well. Thank you both for putting it in. With that, thank you both so much for joining in, and thank you everyone else for taking the time also into this conversation. And we'll see you at our next webinar soon. All right, bye everyone.
Awesome, bye, thank you.
Thanks, folks.